I have two of the panelists with me physically in the studio, Datuk Muzaffar and Encik Shahazwan, who has asked me to call him Juan. And we have from Hong Kong joining us is Gabriel, who is head of stewardship for Asia Pacific for BNP Paribas. So hi Gabriel, hope you can hear us. Right, great.
Yeah.
Okay, we do want to debate on several issues, but as a regulator, I hope that it is an orderly debate. And also the session will focus as much as possible on the topic of the session, which is setting the bar higher. I would encourage the panelists, also for the audience who are posing questions later, to try to keep to the topic, as we have other sessions during today and tomorrow that address other aspects of sustainability. So with that, if I could just very quickly set the context, why is sustainability important and why is it a global agenda? I think we have heard from both the opening remarks of Datuk Syed Zaid, as well as the chat with Yang Mak Mulia Tengku Zatasha, with Tengku Zarina, that it is a global issue, it's a global challenge, and from the financial services perspective, it also a large amount of funding that is required for us to address the sustainability issue. I think perhaps the most, or at least one of the most visible sort of agenda in sustainability is the SDG, or the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, where by 2030, we hope to achieve the 17 goals that have been set up under the SDG. But in so doing, I think estimates have been that around 6 to 7 trillion US dollars are required per annum to actually achieve the SDG by 2030. And a large part of that, about half of that, is actually for developing countries and developing economies. In that regard, I think the role of the capital markets is very important in order to raise financing, funding, and also to attract funders and investors to help finance this requirement for development of infrastructure, social infrastructure, and other needs in order to achieve the 2030 goals. So what have we done? I think in the opening remark by Datuk Syed Zaid, we hear of the SRI roadmap, the 5 I's, so I will not go further into that. At the same time, given the topic of this session, which is looking at ASEAN, just to share with you two reports or publications that one has been completed and the other is in progress for approval, undertaken by first the ASEAN Capital Market Forum, or ACMF, which is a roadmap for ASEAN sustainable capital markets that was launched in March. And this represents the collective views of the capital market regulators in ASEAN. And the second report, which is a report on promoting sustainable finance in ASEAN, undertaken by the Working Committee for Capital Market Development, which are represented by the Ministries of Finance, the central banks, and capital market regulators of ASEAN as well. And I think these two reports reflect how important the regulators and the authorities and the governments in ASEAN are taking this agenda. With that introduction, I would like to start by inviting my three colleagues on the panel to spend about 2 minutes each, if I could ask them, to introduce themselves or their organizations, and also, more importantly, what does sustainability means to them?
Thanks, Zainal. First and foremost, I'd like to thank SIDC and SC for inviting me to be on this panel. And I think it's brilliant that an organization like SC is leading this effort on the capital market. Again, my name is Shahazwan. Everybody calls me Juan, so please do. I'm the Chief International Officer for Tenaga Nasional, TNB being the national utility company of Malaysia, GLC, who are very much looking at ways to provide leadership for corporates in Malaysia. And in sustainability, we aim to be one of those companies who will take that lead. In our own space, in the energy space, we believe we are very serious about providing sustainable energy in Malaysia, but also in the international market. I'm not sure whether many people realize that we already today have 750 megawatts of renewable energy globally, of which 90 megawatts operating here in Malaysia, 30 megawatts which we are under construction, and we continue to look at ways to increase that capacity. But more interestingly, we actually have a large international renewable platform of 660 megawatts in 3 markets. We have the largest wind FIT platform in the UK, and we also own one of the largest solar platforms in the UK, and we want to grow that. And we grow that not just to make a claim. We grow our renewable platform to actually allow for knowledge transfer, to grow our capacity and capability in this space. We believe a lot more can be done here in Malaysia, and we want to take that lead. So from TNB's perspective, we are very serious about sustainable energy. Personally, maybe I can just add on that before, in my previous life, I used to lead the sustainable development sector, investment sector for Khazanah, and I was also the sustainability and impact investing advisor for Temasek. So from a investor's perspective, I know how serious people are looking into this space. I think a lot more than perhaps the public is aware. And I do think capital providers and SRIs are a growing theme and a growing asset class in the region.
Thank you, John. We'll pick up on. I hear you in terms of all the party collaborating, and I don't dispute that. But John, from your example, in a lot of study in economics, the consumers is always right? And so that in the context of finance, it's probably the investors. Do you think investors really have a larger say in driving a sustainability agenda?
So I think the question you asked is about who takes, perhaps if I can position it as who takes the first leap of faith, right? Because I think I do agree with Gabriel that everyone plays a role. Everyone plays a role. But if everybody waits for everyone else, then we're just going to be in a stagnant or a stalemate. And I do think in this case, capital providers who have an activist and a longer term perspective can really take the first leap, right? And what we've seen actually in many markets, especially in North America and in Europe, where capital providers, the investors themselves, are the ones who are driving the activities in the market. So where smart money goes, the companies who want to take advantage of that smart money will follow. Saying that, again, capital providers alone cannot. I mean, I agree with Gabriel. I think the role of regulators, the role of corporates themselves need to follow suit very, very quickly. And in the end, it is the customers who is always right. I think the one thing though, I mean, I think it is a leap of faith for people to understand that sustainability is actually about efficiency, and it's about the term sustainability, right? It is about longevity. So in some investors' perspective, it is about discount rate. It is about discount rate. So if you have a longer term perspective on a company, then your perspective of discount rate is different.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'll just stay with you, Dato'. Maybank, Tenaga, BNP Paribas are all leaders in your respective industries. So do you feel there's a higher role or higher responsibility, level of responsibility, a role that you need to play as leaders of your industries to lead or at least drive the sustainability agenda?
Right.
John?
So, yeah, I agree. And I think Tenaga is very cognizant of its role to be a leader in the energy market in Malaysia and the region. And we are taking those steps. But I would also want to, again, contradict myself in the sense that it is very difficult for an incumbent to move without the industry, continuously putting us at on our feet, right? Again, it's easy for an incumbent like Tenaga to say, well, why should we change? We are the, monopoly. right? But in the end, it is about the customers who drive it, and it is about the customers who want change, and therefore we must always be ready to lead that change. I will say it's not easy. It's not easy for a large company. I'm sure Maybank, Temus will also agree with that. Saying that, I think what we are seeing in the international market, we can see leaders of change in the energy market already. So for Tenaga, it is, for us, it is about going international, looking at ways where we can bring that capability back. Affordable. That's the other word that we always, are very focused on, because the technology in the developing market and technology in the developed market, the application is also very different, right? So it's very important for Tenaga to look at ways to adapt technology for our market, with the view that we are trying to aim to bring sustainable energy and solutions for the market. So yes, the answer is yes. We do see ourselves as a leader.
Well, I won't ask this to the two financial institutions here. I'll ask this question to Juan. How do you quantify as an organization the value of adopting sustainability standards above and beyond what is required by the legal and regulatory requirement? Right? As a leader in your industry, you said, yes, you do play a role. But how do you quantify what's the benefit? What are the costs associated with it?
So, the usual lead to that is that's a very good question, and it's a very difficult one. For Tenaga, for example, I think we do look at the total cost of delivery of energy, right? And the total cost of delivery of energy is not just about the cost to develop a source of energy. It rides all the way through, but also I think everyone talks about the life cycle costs. Now, I say this as a concept. I think many companies, including Tenaga, is still trying to understand what that means. So for us, in order to look at what does sustainability mean for us, it is to understand that product or that services right through the entire value chain, and it is a cradle to grave to and a full life cycle of it. Now that's a long-winded way of saying this, where companies do struggle. I'll be upfront. Companies do struggle, and it is a concept. Perhaps it is much easier, to look at from a investor's perspective. I'll bring up what I've seen from sovereign funds, for example, or pension funds. It's a lot easier in that sense because they do look at the cost of the investment, from start when they invest to where they believe they will exit. And if, for example, at the point where they exit, they think that that company either will not provide or doesn't provide that valuation, that sustainability value, then that's your IRR, right? Your sustainable IRR. The question is how do you...
I could just interject. The Yama Mulia Tengku Zata Shah said that cost shouldn't be an issue, and indeed, to some extent, right? Yeah. So, but as a commercial entity, we know that it is an issue to shareholders. So, maybe what do you do in order to balance that?
So again, I think perhaps Yang Mulia Tengku said, talking about the cost at that point in time, and I agree, and that you don't look at cost only at that point in time, which many corporates do think about it, right? Because you say, what's the cost of investing into renewables, in a Tenaga's perspective. But I think the idea is, I'll talk about renewables. A lot of people say, it's expensive to build solar or wind, but in actual fact, what's actually beneficial for solar and wind is the consistency. Right? The fact that the energy will continue to be developed unless the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow, then we have a bigger problem to worry about. And it's not susceptible to oil prices, for example, which is what I think a lot of end consumers and investors are looking for, that consistency. So again, if you look at the cost of building renewables on its standalone, yes, there are cheaper ways. But when you look at the long life cycle costs, including the end tenure, the replacement costs, actually it is fairly affordable, and in many parts of the world, wind and solar are already at grid parity. So that's one way to think about it.
Perhaps if I could just bring in, another topic related or to transition into another area, which is Islamic finance, right? And when Islamic finance was first developed, there was, it was a gradual sort of incorporation of, the principles. We were, so from a Malaysian standpoint at least, we look at what were available in terms of instruments and resources. And just take the stock screening methodology, for example, that's approved by our Sharia Advisory Council. Initially, we just look at the profitability of the company or the turnover of the company, right? And we just make sure that the benchmarks at 5% and 20%. After quite a number of years, Islamic finance industry has developed. We realized that access to Islamic financing was more was greater and widely available. Then it becomes the screening methodology becomes a bit more sort of specific in terms of level of gearing, cash placements in banks, etc. So I think if we could akin, sort of look at that development within Islamic finance and development within sustainable finance as going through a similar journey. It is a journey, as Dato' Mus mentioned, and also we know that the underlying principles of both Islamic finance and sustainable finance, in fact, most of the faith-based finance, the underlying principles are very similar. So can we actually utilize the strength in Islamic finance or the higher level of awareness of Islamic finance, especially in this part of the world, to harness greater traction for sustainable finance? Perhaps Juan can?
Yeah, so I do think so. I mean, I think the principles are the same and the methodology approach can be applied. I think from where, as a user of financing, right, to help drive our growth in sustainable energy, I think what we are asking for, or what we're looking for, are financiers and capital providers who understand the concept of, what does sustainable energy or energy transition bring to the investors, both equity and debt. So, looking at impact investors, who are providing some form of sustainable or impact funds, capital. I think they do have a similar approach to thinking about, contribution, to think about beyond just the standard definition of profits. So yeah, I do think entities like Maybank who understand Islamic finance are in a better position, right, to actually provide these sort of financing for sustainability and impact on ESG. Maybe I can just add on. I mean, the one thing that perhaps where the Islamic finance really progress very quickly is when you do have standardization and the Sharia Council. I think that's where perhaps on the sustainability side, the impact on ESG side is what we need to set up. Yeah. Because different funds, different capital providers have a different way of thinking about sustainability, right? So, I know several capital providers who are trying to bring an assurance side and an audit side to things. So at least to provide some form of standardization of looking at how sustainability is. That, if we do have that form of sustainability, at least from a Malaysian context or an ASEAN context, I think will help fund providers then put forward products into the market that you can assess on the same basis like Islamic finance.
But also now, let's take that step up further. Right? All of you are in organizations that have regional and global footprints. How do you incorporate or align the sustainability agenda among different group of companies in different jurisdictions? Do you look at this as one common agenda across the group and implement it, or do you look at tailoring the needs of your subsidiary companies in each country?
In terms of my concerns for ASEAN, I guess maybe it's not a direct comparison, but if you were to look at the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and then the effects of it on Europe, and how the European countries who had committed towards carbon offset programs as well as renewable energy targets. I think there was clearly, after the global financial crisis, there was clearly a reduced focus on those. I think eventually the government saw the benefit of it. So if we were to apply lessons learned from past crises like that, the topic of ESG and sustainability may become lower in the government's agenda post-pandemic. But where I think it is different this time, and it is a global phenomenon, that people realize a solution to coming back quickly after a crisis like this is about thinking about sustainability, is about thinking about energy transition. So I think just to say, we now have to focus on our domestic problems of creating economic activities, which is a natural thing to do for governments. I think if we were to think of it from a different lens and say, how does sustainability actually help bring the region and each individual countries back again? I think that's one definitely an area for of a solution to be thought about.
Okay.
I think one of the things that I do think many industries are worried about, two things. Number one is stranded assets, right? Where industries can see a particular asset or investment or product is going to be stranded because the market doesn't want it anymore.
Yes.
Right? The problem is how far does that product become stranded, right? And the concerns with sustainability is that the market does react very quickly, like Dato' Mo said. So that's one. The other one is, of course, affordability. And in different parts of the market, the customers have different affordable level. And then I think that's the other challenge we have about sustainability. Like a lot of people think it's a rich men or women's problem, right? The rest of the masses don't appreciate sustainability. And I think that's wrong, because I think eventually the market do realize and will punish companies who are not sustainable.
I think certainly. Well, I'm afraid we have a lot more questions, but we are out of time. So can I sort of wrap up the session by inviting all three panelists, perhaps in 30 seconds each, your wish for the sustainability agenda in ASEAN? John?
So, I echo what Gabriel said, and on top of that, I think my wish would be that there is a standard and consistent way people of the marketplace to think about sustainability. So, there is definitely room for all of us to work towards a standard way of thinking, and that eventually all of us must realize that to look at costs, just to pick up on that, it is about a life cycle cost, it is about the longer term cost, and that what we are doing to the future generation, we do have to realize that.
Right. Well, we have reached the end of this session. Thank you very much to our three panelists, Dr. Muzaffar, Joan, and Gabriel in Hong Kong. Thank you for your input, very valuable. I hope, I know we have not been able to touch on every single item that we would like to speak about in this session, but within the time frame, hopefully, it's provided some informative sort of food for thought to the audience. I would like to maybe just quickly summarize in terms of maybe a couple of key points. This is, as many of us say during the session, it is a journey. It's not sort of a short trip, a short haul flight from one point to another. It is a journey that we have to take, and it's a journey that we have to take collectively together. All stakeholders have to be in this game, and in order for that to happen, we have to have a holistic ecosystem that facilitates that journey. It is challenging, but it's something I believe, personally, I do believe it's something that we have to do. On that note, can I thank you again, and I'd like to hand over the space to our conference moderator, Jasway. Thank you.
Thank you.